Lucas Grant hadn't slept in 3 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same face staring back at him from the darkness, a man with no eyes, standing perfectly still beneath the flickering streetlight outside his window. Tonight, that man wasn't outside anymore. He was inside the apartment, waiting for Lucas to notice him. It started on a cold Wednesday night when I first saw him. The street outside my apartment was usually quiet after dark, the kind of silence that lets you hear your own breathing. I was sitting by the window, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, when I noticed movement near the lamppost across the road. At first, I thought it was just someone walking home, but then he stopped. He didn't move. Didn't even seem to breathe. He just stood there, staring directly at my window. I remember freezing in place, unsure whether to move or pretend I hadn't noticed. The man wore an oversized hoodie that hid most of his face, and his jeans were so dark they almost blended into the night. But one thing stood out: the faint glimmer of something metallic around his wrist. It caught the light every few seconds, like a tiny flash meant just for me. I tried to ignore him. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he wasn't even looking at me. But the longer I sat there, the more certain I became that his head was tilted upward, aimed directly at my window. I closed the curtain, hoping that would be enough. But even through the thin fabric, I could still feel his stare pressing against me. I turned on every light in my small apartment, trying to chase away the unease that had settled deep in my stomach. Hours passed, and when I finally looked again, he was gone. The next night, he came back. Same spot, same stance. The way he stood there, completely still, made something inside me twist. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? There's a man standing outside looking at me? They'd probably laugh. So I decided to take a picture instead. I zoomed in as far as my phone would allow, but the photo made my chest tighten. His face was completely blurred. Not pixelated, not out of focus. Just gone. It looked like someone had smudged it out with their fingers. That image burned itself into my mind. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every small noise made me jump. I kept checking the lock on my door, making sure the chain was secured, the window shut tight. At one point, I even turned off all the lights and crouched near the window to peek outside again. The street was empty this time, nothing but the faint flicker of the street lamp. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. When morning came, I felt stupid for being scared. I opened the door to grab my mail, and that's when I froze again. Right outside my door, smeared across the welcome mat, were muddy footprints. They stopped exactly where I stood. There weren't any going back the other way, just a single trail leading to my apartment. The prints were too large to be mine, and they were still wet. I looked down the hallway, empty, but the air felt different, heavy, almost alive, as if someone had been standing there just moments before I opened the door. I barely slept the following night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faceless figure standing under the streetlight, waiting, watching. I tried to convince myself it was all some kind of prank, maybe a neighbor messing around. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The footprints outside my door weren't a trick. Someone had been there, close enough to touch the doorknob, close enough to listen. That thought alone kept my heart racing for hours. When I finally drifted off, I woke again in total darkness, the air cold and still. My bedroom window was wide open. I never opened it. The curtains were swaying gently, and the room felt heavier somehow, like the air was thick with something unseen. I turned on my lamp, and that ass when I noticed my phone wasn't T on the nightstand where ID left it. It was lying on the floor, the screen still glowing faintly. The camera app was open, and the recording timer showed that it had been filming for almost an hour. My throat tightened as I hit play. At first, it was nothing but the quiet sound of my breathing while I slept. Then, at around the 40-minute mark, the camera shifted slightly. Something, or someone, had picked it up. The lens tilted toward the doorway. For a few seconds, there was only darkness. And then I saw him. The same man from outside, the same hoodie, the same eerie stillness. He stood just inside my room, his head tilted down toward me. The reflection of the streetlight flickered off his wristband like before. Then the video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the blank screen, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. I searched the entire apartment, every corner, every closet, even under the bed. Nothing. The locks were untouched. The windows were shut again. I couldn't understand how he'd gotten in or why I hadn't yet woken up while it happened. The thought made me sick. I called the police, even though part of me knew they wouldn't believe it. When they arrived, they checked everything, asked questions I couldn't answer, and left without finding any sign of forced entry. One of the officers lingered by the front door, staring at the framed family photo on the wall. His expression changed slightly, confusion mixed with unease. Before leaving, he turned back to me and asked if I lived alone. I nodded, confused. He stared at the photo again for a moment, then just said, "You should take a closer look at that picture." After they left, I stood in front of it, my heart pounding. It was a photo from last summer, taken in my living room. I was standing alone, smiling awkwardly at the camera. But there, in the far corner of the image, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure, a man in a hoodie. His face was blurred, just like before. My hands trembled as I set the frame back down. The realization hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. He hadn't just been outside. He had been here, inside my apartment, for a long time. After that night, I couldn't think straight. Every sound inside the apartment felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the ceiling, the faint tick of the clock. It all made me jump. I kept replaying the video in my mind, seeing that blurred figure standing inches from me while I slept. The thought of him being in my room close enough to touch me made my skin crawl. I took the photo down and shoved it in a drawer, but I couldn't escape the feeling that he was still somewhere nearby. I started keeping all the lights on, even during the day, because the shadows made me feel sick. Days passed without seeing him outside again, but I didn't feel safe. The air in my apartment felt wrong, heavier, like something unseen was sharing the space with me. I'd wake up at random hours to faint noises, slow creaks, the rustle of fabric, a sound like breathing that wasn't mine. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, a flash of dark fabric slipping out of view, but whenever I turned, nothing was there. One night, after nearly 3 days without sleep, I decided to prove to myself that I was imagining everything. I wanted evidence, real physical proof that I could look at in the morning and say, "See? Nothing's wrong." So before going to bed, I sprinkled flour across the living room floor, just a thin layer, enough to catch any footprints if someone walked through. Then I locked every window, double-checked the door, and sat up in bed for hours, watching the glow of the hallway light seep under my door. At some point, exhaustion dragged me under. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes, the room was darker than usual. The lights had gone out. My phone was dead. The air felt damp and cold, the kind of chill that settles into your bones. I got up, heart pounding, and walked into the living room. The flour was no longer smooth. There were footprints, large, uneven, pressed deep into the floor like someone had been standing there for a long time. They led from the front door straight toward my bedroom. My throat closed when I saw where they ended, right beside my bed. But there were no footprints going back the other way. I backed away, shaking, staring at the trail that stopped just short of where I had been sleeping. I checked the door again. It was still locked, chain secured. The windows were sealed shut. There was no way anyone could have entered. And yet, the prints were real. I crouched down and touched one, expecting the flour to smear under my fingers, but it didn't. It was cold, damp, almost sticky, like the residue of mud mixed with something else, something darker. I wiped my hand on my shirt and froze. From the corner of the room, I could smell it now, an awful stench of wet earth and rot. Something had been here, something that wasn't supposed to exist. By the next morning, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I couldn't eat, couldn't think, couldn't even bring myself to step into the living room. The footprints were still there, and the smell of rot hadn't gone away. I tried scrubbing the floor, but no matter how hard I cleaned, the dark stains remained faintly visible beneath the flour. It was as if the floor itself had absorbed whatever touched it. That night, I sat on the couch with every light in the apartment turned on. I told myself I'd stay awake until sunrise, but fatigue came faster than fear. My eyelids grew heavy, and the hum of the lights faded into silence. When I opened my eyes again, the apartment was pitch black. Every light had gone out. My heart started racing. The power must have gone off, but the air felt wrong, thick, pressing down on me. I fumbled for my phone to use the flashlight, but it was gone. I stood up slowly, trying to remember where I'd last placed it, when I heard it. Soft footsteps, coming from the hallway. Slow, careful. They stopped just beyond the living room. I couldn't move. I held my breath, praying I was imagining it, until I heard something else, a faint scraping sound, like fingers dragging along the wall. I stumbled backward, bumping into the couch, and that's when a small flash of light blinked from the corner of the room. My phone. It was lying face up on the floor, the camera light flickering weakly. The screen was cracked, but still recording. My hands were trembling as I picked it up. The video showed my living room, filmed from a few hours earlier. I could see myself sitting on the couch, half asleep, unaware that something was already behind me. In the footage, the man in the hoodie stepped into view from the hallway. He moved slowly, almost silently, standing just inches from where I sat. His face was still blurred, but this time I could make out the faint outline of his mouth, open, stretching into something that looked like a smile. His wristband shimmered in the dim light, reflecting like a blade. The video ended there, cutting to static. I dropped the phone and ran to the door, fumbling with the locks, trying to get out. But the chain had jammed somehow, twisted tight. The key refused to turn. My hands were slick with sweat. That's when I felt a rush of cold air brush the back of my neck. I froze. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what was there. The lights flickered back on for a split second, and in the reflection of the glass door, I saw him, standing directly behind me. His hand was raised, hovering inches from my shoulder. The lights went out again, and everything fell silent. Then from somewhere in the dark, I heard the faint click of a camera shutter. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the window, but it did nothing to warm the air. The apartment felt hollow, drained of life. My phone was lying on the floor beside me, screen shattered, the camera still open but no longer recording. I couldn't remember falling asleep. My memories of the night were fractured. Flashes of movement, that cold breath on my neck, the sound of the shutter echoing in the dark. My body ached as if I'd been dragged across the floor. I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, but deep down, I knew better. Something had happened while I was unconscious. Something real. The first thing I noticed was that all my furniture had been moved. Every chair, every table, even the couch, shifted slightly, as though someone had been walking in slow circles around them. The smell of damp earth was stronger than ever, clinging to everything. I went to the window to open it for air, but when I looked down at the street, my heart nearly stopped. Nearly police cars, an ambulance. A small crowd gathered behind yellow tape. They were loading something onto a stretcher, covering it with a black sheet. I pressed my forehead against the glass, trying to see more clearly. And that's when I noticed something else. Across the street, beneath the same lamppost where I had first seen him, stood a figure in a hoodie, still, silent, staring up at me. My breath caught. I stumbled backward, shaking my head, whispering that it couldn't be real. But it was him, the missing guy. The same stance, the same glint on his wrist, except now. His face wasn't blurred anymore. I could see it clearly, and it was my face. My pulse roared in my ears. I turned from the window and ran to the mirror in the hallway. What stared back at me didn't look right. My reflection was delayed, a fraction of a second behind my movements, like an old film reel stuttering out of sync. Its eyes seemed darker, almost hollow. I stepped closer. The reflection smiled. I didn't. My vision blurred, my knees shaking as I backed away. I could hear something behind the walls, a faint whispering, a voice that sounded eerily like my own. It was repeating a single word over and over, missing. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it only grew louder, filling the entire apartment until it felt like the walls were pulsing with sound. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence. I turned toward the front door. It was wide open. Sunlight spilled into the hall, and for a moment I thought about running, just leaving everything behind. But when I stepped closer, I froze. Muddy footprints led away from the door, down the hall, and into the street below. I followed them with my eyes until they stopped at the spot beneath the lamppost. The figure was gone. Later that day, I saw my photo on the news. The headline read, "Local man found dead in apartment, cause unknown." They showed an image of the crime scene, my window in the background, and under the streetlight, barely visible in the corner of the frame, stood someone in a hoodie, watching.